Well, today we're going to be playing part of an interview with Lindsay Crosby of Locked On MLB Prospects, and we're going to be looking at what happened with the Montreal Tampa Bay partnership that is not going to be in a couple of cities that may be better suited for a major league team than some of the cities we keep hearing about. This is Locked On MLB.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. On today's episode, which is being dropped on the 24th day of January, 2022, we are going to be finishing up our conversation with Lindsay Crosby and looking at those other cities. This show is available wherever you get your podcasts. And thanks so much for making us your first listen. Why not make your second listen be Locked On Bets with your boy Q and expert analysis from Lee Sterling. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On MLB Pod. Same handle for Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. So the first part of the show, I had on Lindsay Crosby, who is the new host of Locked On MLB Prospects. He was on a show on the 18th day of January last week, and it just turned out, as happens from time to time, we just kept talking. There was too much for one show, so we finished the episode we did, and there was other topics we wanted to hit. And along the way, we decided to do this one extra segment, which we are putting in for today's episode of the podcast. So for the first part of the show, please enjoy this part of my conversation with Lindsay Crosby of Locked On MLB Prospects. But we had a bunch of other trade potentials here. So Lindsay, welcome back to the show. Tell us a little bit about your trades and why A's fans are crying.
All right, so if the Braves don't re-sign Freddie Freeman, I think they're going to go out and get Matt Olson. And that's just something because the Oakland A's are the Oakland A's, and they like to get rid of guys for no reason. And so I think the deal here, we talked in the last show about those two outfielders for Atlanta, Drew Waters and Christian Pache. And I think the centerpiece of the deal, you're going to get three major league guys going back to Oakland. You're going to get one of those.
You're sending, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step in. You're sending them to Oakland?
I'm sending one of those two to Oakland. Oakland's pick.
Okay.
Drew Waters or Christian Pache. Catcher William Contreras. He's the second catcher in Atlanta's system. Atlanta has a lot of catchers right now. He's the second catcher. Starting pitcher Tucker Davidson started the World Series game, if you remember. Started game 5 for Atlanta. Yeah. And right-hand pitcher Freddie Tarnock from AA. So I think the combination of those four guys for Matt Olson is a deal that you might see Atlanta do. And it's simply because Atlanta has a lot of confidence in Michael Harris coming up on the farm. And so they know you don't have room for Acuna, Harris, Pache, and Waters. Somebody has to move. And I think one of those two guys will probably get moved in a possible Matt Olson deal. Same thing with William Contreras. They like Shea Langoliers at catcher better, the catcher out of Baylor. And so Contreras would be a candidate to move on once Travis d'Arnaud's done.
Let me ask you a question. Would you want something else from Oakland? I mean, that's giving up a lot for Olson. And I look at it, if I'm the A's, and I'm not, even though I co-hosted Locked On A's a little bit when Jason was going on to paternity leave, I take that trade to the point where I will drive to Atlanta to pick him up and drive him back. And that's not a reflection on Matt Olson, who I think is a fine player.
Right.
The reason why I would, because you're giving up a major league ready outfielder, a catcher whose last name is Contreras, which is kind of like saying a catcher whose last name is Molina, and a pitcher who's a major league ready pitcher, and a quality prospect for a first baseman. And again, this is not to belittle Olson, but there are a lot of first basemen that you could get simply by signing one, as opposed to, or a team like, again, this player is not nearly the player that Matt Olson is, but the Yankees will hand you Luke Voit, and for
A stale bag of
flat
chips.
can of a flat bottle of Pepsi and a VHS copy of Jaws 3D. It's not going to take much to fill the first base hole. Again, Matt Olson's a much better player than Luke Voigt and some of the other players involved there. So again, I'm not. I would understand throwing one of those players in.
In a perfect world, the Braves would also get Sean Manaea in that deal.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But we don't live in a perfect world.
We don't live in a perfect world.
No, I don't think the A's are good. Now I'm the A's backing off. So no, you don't get both of them. Okay,
yeah.
So now we're haggling right now. This is haggling. Welcome to Lockdown Haggling. And
Locked on front office.
Oh man, that would be something. Oh man, all these wannabe GMs. Yeah, that's interesting. Matt Olson would make this. Of course, all this it could be moot if they just re-signed Freddie Freeman.
Absolutely.
And then you could if you have that package that you're going for, you could fill another hole or keep that in your back pocket, because I don't know if you know this, there's sometimes injuries during the regular season, and you may want to pull off, either have one of them slide into the major league roster or have them available for a trade. Let there be light in Alabama. For those of you watching, Lindsay Crosby is doing a strobe show. He's having a rave in the middle. Welcome to Lockdown Rave with Lindsay Crosby. No, I wasn't trying to poo-poo that, but I just think that, re-sign Freeman and you have those great trade chips to fill in another hole.
Absolutely. And the ideal world for Atlanta is just bring Freeman back. Bring Freeman back. Let him finish his career like he wants to. He says he wants to do it because Chipper Jones did it. So this whole thing should be moot, but until the actual contract is signed and we know how this works, it just takes one team with some money to make it happen. That's something you're looking at. Another deal that I had drawn up and looked at was presuming that Kyle Schwarber comes back to Boston. And that you have Bobby Dahlbeck at first. You have JD Martinez only has max 1 year left at DH. The Red Sox
and you have Tristan Casas.
They do have Tristan Casas.
Yes, it's floating in the winds there.
But something that I think they may do to try to solidify the outfield. The issue that I've noticed is they like to have Kike Hernandez be available to be a utility guy. And if he plays center field every day like he has been recently, you kind of lose that flexibility. So the deal I drew up was if the Pirates don't extend Brian Reynolds.
Oh, okay. You have my attention.
Yes. So it's Brian Reynolds going to Boston, and the Pirates are getting Tristan Casas or Marcelo Meyer. I think they're probably going to want Meyer because they're going to want the defensive versatility of a guy who's at shortstop. But you're giving up a lot already. Left-hand pitcher Brandon Walter and right-hand pitcher Brayan Bello. So young lefty, young righty. Bello should be available 23. Walter should be available soon after that. And then just a young outfielder, Gilberto Jimenez. It sounds like a big package, but if you think about 4 years of control of Brian Reynolds, plug in the center field, and it gives you the ability to do so much more with Kike. I think that's a deal Boston has to look at giving up one of those two top guys for if you can go out and get a proven all-star for 4 years on an affordable basis.
And if the Red Sox can take advantage, they almost did this year, of a winnable American League. And now I actually think both Tampa and Toronto are better than Boston this year. But then again, I didn't think the Red Sox were going to get to within 2 wins of the World Series this last year. And of course, there are holes, and there is no super team in the American League. I think if you're a team even on the bubble in the American League, you have to go for it because there is no team that's just heads and shoulders above everyone else. So I understand that that's a trade that you understand that trades aren't in vacuums. It's like you're saying, that will help in center field. But that also that improves Kike Hernandez's ability to be helpful for the squad. And look at that is a steep price, but if that steep price, trading away Yohan Moncada was a steep price, but it brought in Chris Sale. There's sometimes you have to trade something to get something, and that just could wind up being, if you want to take advantage of a window where The Yankees are vulnerable. The Rays are the Rays, where they're very good, but they're an injury away from destruction. Toronto has lost a Cy Young winner and an MVP candidate in one single off season. And Baltimore is trying to every year have the first pick overall. You have a potential to see a chance to steal the division and maybe go far in the postseason. So that's one where you kind of have to take a deep, long breath. But that's if you think that will improve, that gives you flexibility in left and right field with their, because where they traded away Renfroe to bring back Jackie Bradley Jr. in what just struck me as a cost-cutting move. But JBJ is going to be back in the outfield, and maybe that's what they were thinking, hoping that home cooking will, bring him back to the player he was when he was the ALCS MVP. I don't know, neither do you, but your trade does. Maybe they'll throw Jackie Bradley into the deal to Pittsburgh, and he actually doesn't play another game with Boston, and they throw in a major leaguer into play center field in Pittsburgh.
One of the big things, if you look at trades for established major league talent, is always making sure that the team who's losing the keystone player has somebody to immediately slot into his spot in the lineup. So throwing in a guy like a Jackie Bradley Jr. is a big one. I was looking at a trade. I was talking with somebody from the Mariners about a trade for Brian Reynolds to the Mariners. And it was the same thing. It was like, and we were looking at Taylor Trammell and Emerson Hancock as the hot prospect, and then catcher outfielder Harry Ford as the young guy with potential. And he said, you have to give me Kyle Lewis too, because you have to give me a replacement in the outfield for Brian Reynolds in year one. So like, that's another deal where the Mariners can go out and get a big name, trade away some guys who are blocked, some younger guys, and a hot prospect in Hancock. I think if I'm the Pirates, I hear that and I counter, instead of Hancock, I ask for Matt Brash. And it's something where Brian Reynolds doesn't have to get moved. They can keep him for 4 years. And so if you're going to move Brian Reynolds, ask for the world and say, give me Matt Brash to go along with Lewis and Trammell, and maybe I'll consider.
Yeah, I think that's steep.
It is. It's real steep. And that's one of those things, like, the Pirates don't have to do it. So if they're going to trade Reynolds, you have to convince them. But that's something where I think unless you do that, you're going to see the Pirates just say, we'll hold on to Brian Reynolds.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's the case. And I would say when you're in a situation like that where you're trying to line up your players, yes, sometimes you have to send in a major leaguer at that point, but sometimes you have to add something else to the team because these teams need a boost. Mm-hmm. So what I would do if I were those teams is I'd say throw in some Built Bars, because Built Bars is the best tasting protein bar out there. It's a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easy to stick to your New Year's resolutions because they taste so great. You'll want to eat it. Sometimes you want to eat healthy, but it's so boring. Like week 3, you're like, I need some chocolate. Well, guess what? Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. None of this fake stuff. They contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Can't even say it. That's how excited I am. Compare that to a candy bar, which is worse. Now look at. If you are someone who wants some variety in your Built Bars, I love it. You love it. Yeah. Hey, let me just ask you a quick question here. Lindsay Crosby, what's your favorite kind of Built Bar?
Peanut butter brownie.
Peanut butter brownie is pretty good.
Love it.
I like the mint brownie. I like the cookies and cream. My favorite one is the raspberry, because I love the tanginess of the raspberry with the chocolate. But there's so many great flavors to choose from. In fact, Built Bar is always coming out with new limited time flavors. So check out Built.com often. Keep refreshing that and see what's new. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCK15. Get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. Hey, Lindsay Crosby, thanks so much for your quick cameo on this episode of Locked On MLB. All right, thanks so much. In the previous segment, Lindsay Crosby. Follow him at Crosby Baseball on Twitter, or Locked On Farm, which is his show, Locked On MLB Prospects. Hey, not a lot of baseball news, obviously, because we're still in the middle of this ridiculous lockout. I'm going to be talking about something pretty soon, but I really think that baseball should really start to act the way I do when I know, like, a relative or someone that isn't often coming to my home comes to my home. Like sometimes I have to clean and scrub, and sometimes I boil the house. And there have been times that I've cleaned the house and I've said, pretend that your mother's showing up, pretend that your mother-in-law's showing up. Just pretend that. They may not be, but clean as if they are. Just clean as if they are. Well, maybe the two sides should negotiate now as if this is the deadline, because it's coming faster than you think. The football playoffs are starting to wind down. We know who the conference championships are going to be. And that's usually around the time that spring training starts to percolate, the ebbs and flows of a year. Everything's obviously screwed up the last couple of years because of COVID. But the fact of the matter is this: the time is coming pretty soon where they're going to have to make some decisions in order to start spring training on time. And that affects a lot of people other than players and owners. It affects a lot of people whose very livelihood depends on whether or not there's a sport being played. Now, I'm not going to both sides this. The owners are locking them out. The players are not on strike. That being said, come to the negotiating table. Come to the negotiating table and let's work out a deal. I obviously have been siding with the players almost always, but at this point, I just want to make sure no games are lost, that no significant time has passed, and baseball can't afford to take themselves out of our entertainment queue. And besides, the new season of Ozark is out, which just goes to show that your entertainment is always jam-packed with stuff. And if you remove something from that, like a game of Jenga, well, people aren't always sad to remove things from their queue because it's okay, now I don't have to worry about that. I'll go watch something else. Remember what you are, baseball. Your content, your entertainment. You're competing with the new season of Ozark, which so far is awesome. But one of the things that we did find out about is that the Major League Baseball has rejected a Tampa Bay Rays proposal to split the season between St. Petersburg and Montreal. Last Thursday, the Rays principal owner, Stuart Sternberg, announced that. And for the last couple of years, that has been floated out there as kind of a feathered fish in some ways. In some ways, it's a way to say, okay, the stadium situation is not working in Tampa. We know it didn't work in Montreal. Maybe we can Voltron these two bad stadiums together and make it one good stadium. That worked well. But the real idea is it's a way for the Rays to test the waters of Montreal to see whether or not that is a place for them to potentially move to and see what kind of potential interests you can have. I can't think of two places on the entire map of North America that are more different than Montreal and Central Florida. And I've been to both, and I happen to like Central Florida. I happen to like Montreal. They're in different countries. They're different climates. They're different languages. There's virtually nothing that Montreal and Tampa Bay have in common. One is a city which feels like it's a Swiss French-speaking metropolitan community, and the others had many recent Stanley Cup champions, which I'm sure the people of Montreal love. But in the proposal, it was shot down for a couple of things. A couple of reasons why. It's a ridiculous concept. I mean, we've seen what happened with Toronto, and this was made imperative through COVID, to have them be a vagabond franchise, doesn't seem to make sense. But it didn't seem to, it was, I think more than one person saw that this was an example of 100% pure, I guess, indecisiveness. Like, let's make a decision here. And I think one of the things you're seeing is that if there's going to be any sort of agreement, there's some things that have to come into place. Baseball is going to have to expand again, especially if you don't want to have a interleague game played every single day. You have to expand it to 32 teams. And as I've pointed out, for those of you who said it's been too soon since the last expansion, this is the longest we've gone without an expansion since the first one. Since the first expansion in 1961 and 1962, which gave us the Angels, the team that were the Senators that are now called the Rangers. Then you had the Houston Colt 45s, now called the Astros, and the Mets. That first wave of expansion of 61 and 62. Then you had several other waves, but we've gone since 1998. That's the last time we've had two new teams start up. And that was Tampa Bay and the Arizona Diamondbacks. We've gone this entire century so far, which we are 22% of the way through it without expanding baseball. Now, in order to do that, and I do think that's going to be a huge part of whatever collective bargaining agreement comes about, you'll get expansion fees, which will help the owners. You'll get a bunch of new jobs, which will help the Players Association. This is something that works out for everybody. But as I said before, you can't do it and still have the A's and the Rays in their situation. So it's odd that it's putting a little pressure on Oakland and on Tampa Bay to figure out their stadium situation. And the A's keep saying, oh, we're on the verge of doing this, we're on the verge of doing that. And we are now in the fourth straight decade of hearing that the A's are on the verge of getting a brand new stadium. All right. I will believe it when I see it. I remember the plans in San Jose and Fremont and in the Coliseum site and in the downtown, and then next to where the Sharks play, all these different places, maybe Santa Clara, all these places were brought up as potential landing spots for the A's. And they're still in the crumbling Coliseum. And we keep seeing, oh, we're going to move it to this place that starts, I think it's Ybor City. I don't know how to pronounce it. I haven't been to that part of Central Florida. Downtown Tampa, new place in St. Petersburg, this, that, or the other thing. Still, no ground has been broken. And they got to come up with something. And Montreal looked like a potential landing place. Lest we forget, the Expos were popular for a period of time. And if they had gotten a halfway decent stadium instead of the crashed Starship Enterprise that exists at L'Estade Olympique, which is way outside the city, they may have gotten themselves a decent crowd there. Now, I've said this before and I've said it again. I don't want the Rays to move from Tampa Bay. I think that baseball could work in Central Florida. I don't want the A's to move from Oakland. I love Oakland A's fans. I love the experience of going to an A's game filled with people who are not the biggest crowd, but certainly one of the most passionate baseball crowds you will ever see. The people who show up to A's games love their A's. And by the way, the Rays do have a following. They have outstanding television ratings. They just don't go to the ballpark because it's in the wrong place. So I do think they can exist there, but they got to come up with something. I mean, it's been decades. They've had decades. Remember how I said that baseball has had, has to act like grownups are showing up, parents are showing up. Well, that's what they have to do with the A's and the Rays. I want the A's and the Rays to stay. But if they can't, then they got to get off the pot. And the Montreal Tampa Bay proposal just was silly. It was indecisiveness. It was trying to have your cake and eat it too. Make a decision. Okay. Are you going to go to Tampa or are you going to go to Montreal? Pick one. Make a choice. And I'll tell you something, though. I've mentioned that we may need to adjust how we look at what we need from a stadium. I suggested that the A's might be better off building a 20,000 seat stadium, because if it's about optics and having a packed house, then you can have that. And the success of a franchise is not completely based upon the ticket sales and the box office. There are many other factors. But the fact that there are other factors is one of the things that made me stop and think about places where we could put a Major League Baseball team. And that's what we're going to be talking about in our final segment. I want to talk a little bit about BetOnline. BetOnline remains the number one spot for all your sports wagering for 2022. New year and a new updated desktop and mobile website. Sign up today to receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Use promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, right down to your favorite Las Vegas casino game, Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. BetOnline is where the game starts. You know, I was reading something in an article. I think it was from the Tampa Bay Times. I'm sorry, I should have the article in front of me to quote it. But they brought up something that was an interesting point. The Braves have moved from the perfectly good Turner Field to the new stadium they're doing out there in the suburbs. They were saying they got more corporate sponsorship than from SunTrust than they got for the Rays got from every single company in Central Florida. One of the reasons they moved there was for corporate reasons. I remember when I was working for a tech company, we had an office that was right nearby where the new stadium is. And all that corporate money drew the Braves from, as I said, a perfectly good stadium. Turner Field was a perfectly good ballpark. And said, no, we're going to move somewhere else. We're going to move to the north. And, and you can't argue the success of what they've had there. But attendance is not the primary metric of the success of a team, and probably not even the metropolitan area. Maybe, just maybe, being in a region where you have the most corporate money and the most corporate sponsorships to pull from is probably going to be a lot more important than ticket sales and attendance and how close you are to a big city. That's one of the reasons why I've been asked by a couple of people where you think the A's should move to if they don't stay in Oakland. As I said, I prefer they stay in Oakland, but if they have to move, I would like them to go to Portland because I'd love to see Portland have a team. But there are so many big companies that have their big offices in Tennessee that Nashville would seem like a natural place to put a team, that there'd be money there and fan interest. And I've been to the ballpark there, and you'd be able to put just a few additions on there. And next thing you know, boom, you have at least a place to play ball for the next few years, which will probably be better than whether they're playing A's games or Rays games as it is right now. Nashville should absolutely be looked upon as that because A, it's a great city and it could be a great sports city and it has a great downtown, but there's also money there. Yeah, I know FedEx is in Memphis, but there's a lot of Tennessee money there. And that could make a lot more sense than trying to see what kind of ticket sales you're going to get or how much of it, how big the media market is. Media market is not as important anymore. We're watching stuff on our devices now. It almost doesn't matter where a team plays anymore. So if you put them in a decent ballpark and you get a decent crowd there, and then you have the corporate money flowing in, Nashville makes a hell of a lot more sense than Montreal or Tampa Bay, or maybe even, Oakland. There's so many huge corporations in the San Francisco Bay Area that, it's hard to believe that we've not been able to have one privately funded stadium in the East Bay, but here we are. I'll tell you another place. A lot of these companies are moving to Texas. A few years ago, I talked about Austin. Why not Austin? A lot of companies are moving back to Texas. A lot of money flowing into Texas. A lot of money in Texas anyway. And imagine being the first major league franchise in a market like Austin. The pride of this, putting Austin on the proverbial map, great city as it is. Lots of big tech companies are moving back to Texas as it stands. There's already a team in Dallas or outside of Dallas. There's already a team in Houston. Why not Austin? If you're going to make some money there, I'll tell you the most intriguing place to put a Major League Baseball team, to move a Major League Baseball team or to expand a Major League Baseball team that I've not been hearing much. And tell me where I'm wrong. Omaha, Nebraska. Yeah, you heard me. There's no major. Well, there was once an NBA team there. The Kings split time between Omaha and Kansas City at one point, and it didn't work for them any more than a Rays going back and forth between Montreal and Tampa did. Berkshire Hathaway, Union Pacific, Mutual of Omaha, they're gigantic companies that are based in Nebraska. corporate money, corporate sponsorship, all that stuff exists in Nebraska. You know what Nebraska also has? It has a place to play. Charles Schwab Field. Charles Schwab Field. That is where they play the College Baseball World Series. Charles Schwab Field, located relatively new ballpark. It was used to be TD Ameritrade Ballpark, but it was built in 2011. Okay. It has a capacity of about 25,000, but its simple expansion could make it a 35,000 seat stadium. There's a place to play. There's money there. It's a city that would embrace having their own team. Yeah, they would be siphoning off from Kansas City Royals fans, and they'd be siphoning off from St. Louis Cardinal fans, but you have built-in rivalries too. Omaha. If you're going to be chasing money, and let's face it, that's what all this is about anyway, and that's what will end the lockout, is owners going, oh boy, well, we've got to make some money. You know, they're pouring in profits, and they're going to expand by 2. Now, I wish there'd be a team in Tampa and Oakland. I don't think there will be. I think the A's and the Rays are both going to move. Montreal is only chosen because it's a stadium waiting there, but also Montreal could become very popular again too. It's been a long time. The wounds of 1994, those are old. Those are old wounds. And a lot of them been healed over. For most kids, it means nothing. You could succeed in a place like Montreal with the right ownership and eventually the right stadium. It's tough to see what would happen. Tampa Bay never got a fair shot. The A's have been there a long time. The A's have been in Oakland longer than they were in Philadelphia. They've had a long time to build a stadium. But think long and hard. Nashville, Austin, Omaha, all places to potentially plop a major league franchise. It's something to think about. If you have thoughts, let me know. Send me at Sully Baseball on Twitter. And by the way, thanks for making us your first listen. We're available on all your free podcasting platforms. Make your second listen be Locked On Bets with your boy Q and expert analysis from Lee Sterling. Talking about, well, we talked a little bit with our new friend and the host of Locked On MLB Prospects, Lindsay Crosby, but also about potential landing spots for expansion and moving teams. This is Locked On MLB for the 24th day of January, 2022. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.